The Texas heat shimmered like a mirage across the empty highway as the prison bus rumbled toward Gatesville Correctional Facility, its metal frame creaking under the weight of silence and regret. Inside sat Mariah Sanders, a 27-year-old woman whose soft brown eyes hid a lifetime of mistakes behind a hardened stare. She wasn't born for prison life. She'd been a waitress in Houston, a dreamer who once believed that love could rewrite a person's fate. But one night, a desperate robbery gone wrong ended in gunfire, blood, and betrayal. Her boyfriend escaped. She didn't. When the steel gates of Gatesville clanged shut behind her, it was as though the world had locked her away from itself. The air inside was thick with disinfectant and despair, a strange blend of hopelessness and survival. "Welcome to hell, sweetheart," one guard had muttered as he pushed her toward the intake cell, where cameras watched like unblinking eyes. Mariah stripped, showered, and dressed in an orange jumpsuit that hung loosely on her thin frame, the color of punishment burning against her skin. Officer Daniel Reeves was watching from above, a man whose authority was etched into every move he made. Tall, stoic, and known for keeping order through fear, he was the kind of man no one dared cross. Yet when his eyes met Mariah's for the first time, something shifted, a spark neither of them wanted nor could control. Inmates whispered as she passed. The new girl's already got the warden's dog drooling. Mariah ignored them, keeping her chin high, pretending she didn't feel the weight of his stare burning into her back. Days turned into weeks, the same monotonous rhythm of cell checks, kitchen duty, and shouted orders echoing through concrete walls. Still, every night when she returned to her bunk, she thought of Reeves, his steady voice, his quiet presence, the strange gentleness in his eyes when no one was watching. He began finding excuses to be near her. A search here, a reprimand there, each encounter laced with something unspoken. Power was his shield, temptation his flaw. For Mariah, he was both danger and escape. Rain lashed the prison windows one night, and thunder rolled across the plains like the voice of fate itself. Reeves stood outside her cell during the midnight rounds, their eyes locking for a moment too long. "Get some sleep," he said, his tone softer than rules allowed. She nodded, heart pounding, realizing the line between survival and destruction had already blurred. Outside, lightning flashed against the razor wire. Inside, something darker flickered to life, a bond that defied the law, one that would end in whispers of pregnancy, betrayal, and death. The gates had swallowed her, but Mariah Sanders wasn't done fighting. What no one knew was that her story, the scandal it would spark, and the crime it would reveal, had only just begun. Officer Daniel Reeves had spent 15 years inside Gatesville Correctional Facility, long enough to know that emotions were poison in a place like this. He was a man built from rules, boundaries, and silence, a soldier of order in a world of chaos. But lately, his own reflection in the mirror had begun to look like that of a stranger, haunted by the image of one inmate, Mariah Sanders. He tried to tell himself it was just curiosity, the kind that came from watching a new prisoner navigate the brutality of confinement. But when he found himself lingering outside her cell at night, listening to her breathing steady in the dark, he knew curiosity had turned into something far more dangerous. His wife, Kelly, noticed the change before he did, the late shifts, the distracted conversations, the smell of the prison clinging to him like guilt. Reeves told her it was work stress, but even as he said it, he could feel the lie burning on his tongue. Inside the prison, Mariah had adapted fast. She had learned which inmates to avoid, which guards to flatter, and which rules could bend without breaking. Reeves admired that her intelligence, her restraint, the way she refused to be broken by the system designed to crush her. One evening, during a corridor inspection, he found her in the laundry room, alone, folding sheets under the humming fluorescent light. "You shouldn't be here after hours," he said quietly. "And you shouldn't be talking to me like this," she replied, her voice steady, but her eyes unreadable. For a moment, neither moved. The hum of the machines filled the silence between them like static. He reached out, not thinking, and brushed a loose strand of hair from her face, an act that crossed a line both of them understood could never be uncrossed. That night, Reeves drove home in silence, his mind looping the moment again and again. The next day, he altered the duty roster, assigning himself to Mariah's block under the pretense of security restructuring. The other guards raised eyebrows, but said nothing. Reeves was their superior, and in prison politics, questioning authority was a fool's game. Over the next weeks, their conversations grew longer, quieter, hidden in corners where cameras didn't reach. He told her about his daughter, about how the world outside felt smaller every year. And Mariah listened like no one had ever listened before. For her, Reeves became a lifeline, someone who saw her as human, not just a number behind bars. But in a place like Gatesville, secrets never stayed buried. Another guard, Officer Lang, had started to notice Reeves's late-night rounds, the subtle changes in his routine, and the way his gaze lingered too long on a particular cell door. Lang was ambitious, always looking for leverage, and he'd found something worth exploiting. One night, as Reeves handed Mariah an extra meal tray, an innocent gesture, he told himself, Lang watched from the shadows, his smirk hidden behind the dim corridor lights. The next morning, Reeves found an anonymous note in his locker. "Careful, Daniel. Someone's watching." His stomach dropped, his pulse hammering as he read it again. The walls that had once protected him now felt like they were closing in. For the first time in 15 years, the guard wasn't in control. He was trapped inside the same system he had sworn to police. And somewhere in the dark, a secret had begun to rot, waiting to be exposed. Nights at Gatesville carried a silence so heavy it could crush a soul. A silence that wasn't peaceful, but predatory, waiting for someone to make a sound, to reveal weakness, to become prey. Mariah had learned this rhythm well, but lately, the nights didn't just frighten her, they called to her. Somewhere beyond the echo of clanging cell doors and the low hum of flickering lights, there was Daniel Reeves, the man who had become both her protector and her sin. It started innocently, if anything inside those walls could ever be innocent. A whisper through the bars, a glance that lingered longer than it should. The quiet exchange of forbidden words when no one else was watching. Reeves would find excuses to patrol her block after midnight, his flashlight beam tracing the floor before it settled briefly on her face. "You awake," he'd murmur, and she always was. Some nights he would slip her extra food, a piece of fruit, a small kindness in a world that offered none. Other nights, their conversations would stretch into hours, fragments of lives they could never have, dreams too fragile to exist under the hum of security cameras. He told her he once wanted to be a teacher, that the job had been a compromise after the army. And she told him about the little apartment in Houston she'd never see again. The smell of rain through cracked windows. The sound of traffic that once felt like freedom. Each word drew them closer until the lines blurred beyond recognition. The first time he unlocked her cell door, the sound of the key turning echoed like a death sentence. They stood inches apart, the fluorescent light washing their faces, pale. "This is wrong," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Everything in here is wrong," she replied. When he touched her, it wasn't rough or desperate, like prison rumors painted such moments. It was slow, quiet, and terrified. They both knew what they were risking. His badge, her life, everything. Afterward, he sat on the edge of her bed, head in his hands, whispering, "If they find out, we're both dead." She didn't answer, just rested her hand on his shoulder. As if that single gesture could silence the inevitable. Days passed, and the air between them thickened with guilt and desire. Mariah felt the other inmates watching, sensing something off, their glances sharp as blades. Officer Lang's suspicions deepened. He began following Reeves's routes, memorizing his schedules, waiting for proof. But love, if that's what it was, made them reckless. One stormy night, Reeves didn't wait for the rounds to end. He went to her cell early, his uniform soaked from the rain, and stayed until dawn. The world outside their walls was drowning in thunder, and inside, two people were drowning in something just as dangerous. When the morning siren blared, signaling shift change, Reeves realized too late that the cameras might have caught the timing of his patrols. As he left her cell, he noticed the faintest red light blinking above the corridor, a new camera installation he hadn't noticed before. His blood turned to ice. Someone was watching, and whatever happened next, there was no turning back. For the first time since he'd taken the job, Daniel Reeves felt fear. Not for his career, but for the woman whose name he could no longer hear without guilt clawing at his chest. By the time autumn settled over Gatesville, the air inside the prison had grown heavier, thick with rumors that spread faster than the scent of bleach after lockdown. The whispers started small, a late-night sighting here, a suspicious exchange there. But in a place built on secrets, even silence spoke volumes. Officer Lang had been watching Reeves for weeks, his curiosity sharpened by jealousy and ambition. Reeves had once been the model of discipline, a man the warden trusted implicitly. But now his pattern had changed. Longer patrols, unlogged visits, and a strange tension in his eyes. The kind that comes from living two lives at once. Lang began documenting everything. The shift overlaps, the missing minutes, the unexplained camera blackouts. He knew what he'd seen wasn't innocent, but he also knew that evidence was power, and power could buy anything in a system as corrupt as Gatesville's. Meanwhile, Mariah felt the pressure closing in from every direction. Her cellmates had grown quiet around her, their laughter turning to smirks the moment she entered a room. They'd noticed the way her meals came a little fresher, the way she seemed cleaner, calmer, untouched by the misery that consumed the rest of them. In prison, difference was dangerous. It drew attention, and attention could get you killed. One afternoon, while mopping the corridor floor, Mariah overheard two inmates whispering near the laundry gate. "They say she's with a guard," one hissed. "That's why she don't flinch no more." Mariah kept her head down, pretending not to hear, but the words sank deep like splinters. That night, Reeves came to her cell, looking more exhausted than usual. "Lang's been sniffing around," he muttered, glancing over his shoulder. "He knows something." Mariah's heart clenched. "Then end it," she whispered. "Walk away." But Reeves shook his head. "It's too late for that." He wasn't just protecting her anymore. He was protecting himself, and that was far more dangerous. Their connection had become a noose tightening around both their necks. The following week, Lang handed an anonymous tip to the warden, a report claiming Officer Reeves had been compromising security protocols and engaging with an inmate beyond professional limits. The warden, a woman named Eleanor Strick, was known for her cold precision. She said nothing, only ordered silent monitoring and authorized internal surveillance upgrades on C Block, Mariah's block. Cameras were repositioned, guards rotated, and a new layer of tension settled over the halls. Reeves noticed the changes immediately. "They're watching us," he warned, his voice low and urgent. Mariah stared through the bars, panic flickering across her face. "Then what happens when they find out?" He didn't answer. That night, he burned the only letter she had written him, watching the flames curl the edges of her words into black ash. Still, no amount of destruction could erase what had already been done. Lang, meanwhile, grew bold, cornering Mariah in the corridor during meal duty, leaning close enough that his breath hit her ear. "You think he can save you? Wait till the warden gets her proof." His grin was cruel, his eyes alive with the satisfaction of a predator who had already chosen his prey. When Reeves saw her trembling later that evening, something inside him snapped. He confronted Lang behind the storage wing, the two men standing inches apart beneath the flickering bulb. "Stay away from her," Reeves warned, his voice low and trembling with rage. "Or what?" Lang sneered. "You'll break the rules again." Their eyes locked, the silence electric, but both knew this was only the beginning. The prison, once merely a cage, had become a battlefield, and every secret was a loaded gun waiting to fire. Warden Eleanor Strick was not a woman who believed in coincidence, and certainly not in mercy. Her sharp blue eyes missed nothing as she walked through the corridors of Gatesville, heels clicking against the concrete floor like a metronome of authority. She had ruled this prison for nearly a decade, keeping both guards and inmates under the iron weight of her control. So when reports landed on her desk about Officer Daniel Reeves, a veteran guard suddenly accused of improper contact with an inmate, she didn't see gossip, she saw a threat to her kingdom. Strick knew how easily scandal could bleed through these walls, how quickly one mistake could unravel the illusion of order she'd built. Quietly, she launched her own investigation, pulling surveillance tapes, reviewing duty logs, and questioning staff with her trademark tom that terrified more than shouting ever could. The footage was grainy, incomplete. Conveniently, some files from C Block had been deleted. That alone was proof enough that something was being hidden. Reeves, oblivious to the tightening noose around him, continued his nightly rounds, his heart torn between duty and a dangerous affection he couldn't extinguish. Mariah sensed the shift in the air, the way guards whispered less and watched more, the way even the air vents seemed to hum with suspicion. One evening, during dinner, she caught sight of the warden standing at the end of the cafeteria, her gaze fixed like a hawk's. Their eyes met briefly, and Mariah felt her stomach drop. It wasn't anger she saw there, but curiosity, the kind that dissects and destroys. That night, Reeves visited her cell earlier than usual. tension coiled in every movement. "They're looking into us," he whispered, his voice a rasp. "Lang's been talking. The warden's not buying denials anymore." Mariah's hands shook as she gripped the bars. "Then we stop. Now, please." But Reeves's face was unreadable, his eyes shadowed by guilt. "If they find out, they'll transfer you, maybe worse." "I won't let them hurt you." She stared at him, tears burning her eyes. "You already did." For a long moment, neither spoke. Beyond the walls, thunder rolled again, as if Texas itself could sense the storm brewing inside its coldest prison. The next morning, Strick summoned Reeves to her office. The room smelled of stale coffee and power. "You've been a good officer, Daniel," she began, her tone deceptively soft. "But I need to know what's been happening on your block." Reeves held her gaze, every muscle in his body rigid. "Nothing, ma'am. Routine as ever." Her eyes flicked to the folder on her desk, still photographs, timestamps, gaps in logs that spoke louder than words. "I think you're lying," she said calmly, sliding the folder toward him. Inside was a single image, blurry but unmistakable. Reeves standing inside an inmate's cell long past curfew. Mariah's face, half turned toward him, frozen in shadow. His throat tightened. "That's not what it looks like," he managed to say, but the warden leaned forward, her voice a whisper of steel. "Everything in here looks exactly like what it is." She dismissed him without another word, but the damage was done. By the end of the day, rumors spread through the guardroom like wildfire. Lang was grinning again. Inmates were whispering louder. And Mariah, now watched by every pair of eyes in C Block, realized that their secret wasn't a secret anymore. The warden had started her hunt, and in Gatesville, no one escaped the warden's hunt alive. The days that followed the warden's inquiry felt like walking through a minefield for both Mariah and Reeves. Every glance, every whisper, threatening to detonate what little safety they had left. Gatesville's air had changed. It was sharper, colder, alive with suspicion. Guards who once joked with Reeves now greeted him with silence, their eyes avoiding his. He had become the hunted, a man trapped in the same concrete cage he once controlled. Mariah, meanwhile, found herself isolated, her every move monitored, her cell searched twice a day. The inmates sensed blood in the water. They could smell weakness, and weakness meant opportunity. "He's gonna hang for you," one of them hissed during yard time, her grin wicked with delight. Mariah didn't respond. She couldn't afford to. Inside, her heart was breaking in slow, silent pieces. That night, Reeves stood in the locker room long after his shift ended, staring at his reflection in the cracked mirror. His eyes were hollow, the weight of guilt pressing on his shoulders like a sentence already served. He thought of Kelly, his wife, who had stopped calling days ago. Thought of their daughter, who would one day hear the truth from someone else. And then he thought of Mariah, the way she looked at him like he was more than the uniform he wore, like he was still human. The lines between love and ruin had long disappeared, and he was too deep to crawl back. He knew the warden was waiting for him to make a mistake, something irreversible, something that would justify her wrath. That moment came 2 nights later, when Lang cornered Mariah in the corridor outside the laundry block. "You think he's gonna save you?" he sneered, shoving her against the wall. "He's not a hero, sweetheart. He's just another man who wanted a taste of what he shouldn't have." Mariah shoved him back, rage burning through her fear, but Lang only laughed. You'll learn what happens to girls who mess with guards." Before he could touch her again, Reeves appeared, his face twisted with fury. Without a word, he grabbed Lang by the collar and slammed him against the wall, his voice low and shaking. "You ever touch her again, I swear to God." Lang cut him off with a smirk. "Go ahead, hit me. Give me the proof I need." For a heartbeat, Reeves wanted to. Every nerve in his body screamed for it. But then he saw the security camera blinking above them, that red light watching like an unblinking eye. He let go, stepping back, chest heaving, realizing too late that restraint wouldn't save him. It only delayed the inevitable. Lang straightened his shirt, smirk widening. "You're done, Reeves. And when you go down, she's going with you." The next morning, Lang filed an official report, claiming assault and misconduct. The warden didn't hesitate. Reeves was suspended pending investigation, escorted out of the facility like a criminal. As he walked through the front gates, stripped of badge and weapon, Mariah watched from her cell window, her heart splintering with every step he took away from her. That night, the prison felt colder than ever. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the echo of his voice replaying in her mind. "I won't let them hurt you." But now, there was no one left to protect her. Outside, Reeves sat in his truck under the rain, gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. Inside Gatesville, Mariah closed her eyes and whispered to the silence, "We were both already broken." And somewhere deep within the prison, under the hum of flickering lights, fate began to sharpen its blade. The morning after his suspension, Daniel Reeves woke to a silence that felt heavier than prison walls, a suffocating reminder of the life he had shattered with his own hands. The badge that had once defined him now sat on the kitchen counter, stripped of meaning, glinting dully in the gray light. Kelly had taken their daughter to her mother's, leaving behind nothing but a note that said, "You need help." Reeves read it twice before crumpling it in his fist. Outside, the rain hadn't stopped, as though the Texas sky itself refused to forgive. He tried to call the prison, to speak to someone, anyone, but his access had been revoked. His world, once filled with order and authority, had reduced to static and silence. Inside Gatesville, Warden Strick moved swiftly. She placed Mariah under isolation for her protection. Though everyone knew what it meant, solitary confinement was punishment disguised as mercy. The other inmates jeered as she was led away, hands cuffed, eyes hollow. Strick wanted answers, and she would break Mariah to get them. "He's gone, you know," the warden said during her first interrogation, her tone almost gentle. "He's not coming back for you." Mariah stared at the floor, refusing to speak. "You think you were special to him. You were a mistake he couldn't hide." Still, no response. The warden leaned closer. "But we can make this easier. Tell me the truth, and I'll make sure you're transferred. New facility, new start." Mariah finally lifted her eyes, and for a moment, Strick saw something that unsettled her, not guilt, but pity. "You don't understand," Mariah said softly. "He was the only one here who remembered I was human." Strick's jaw tightened. "Then remember this, humanity doesn't survive in here, outside those walls." Reeves spent his days pacing, sleepless, his mind replaying Lang's smirk, the warden's cold eyes, Mariah's trembling voice. He started drinking, first to forget, then just to feel something other than shame. Days blurred into nights, until one evening, A knock came at his door. It was Officer Lang, standing in the rain, smirk still intact. "You fell hard, didn't you?" he said, stepping inside, uninvited. "They're closing in on her, by the way. She's not holding up well in the box." Reeves froze. "What do you want?" Lang shrugged. "Maybe I want to see how far you'll go for your little inmate. Maybe I just like watching a man break." Reeves lunged, shoving him against the wall, rage spilling out like fire. Lang laughed, even as blood trickled from his lip. "That's it," he hissed. "That's who you are." Reeves let him go, chest heaving, realizing too late that Lang had come for exactly this, to provoke him, to push him further over the edge. When Lang left, Reeves knew there was only one thing left to do. He couldn't save his job, his marriage, or his name, but maybe, somehow, he could still save her. The next morning, he packed his car and drove back toward Gatesville, rain still falling, heart pounding with something between desperation and resolve. The facility gates loomed like a specter, and the guards at the entrance moved to block him. "You're not allowed here," one said. Reeves looked past them, toward the gray buildings that held everything he'd destroyed. "I just need to talk to her," he said quietly. 5 minutes, they refused. But as he turned away, he swore he'd find a way in. Because love, the kind that defied rules, reason, and redemption, had turned him into something far more dangerous than a broken guard. It had turned him into a man with nothing left to lose. The rain finally stopped the next morning, leaving Gatesville cloaked in damp mist and dread. Inside her solitary cell, Mariah sat on the floor with her knees drawn to her chest, staring at the single slit of light cutting through the wall. Her body ached, but it was the silence that hurt more, a silence filled with the absence of Daniel Reeves. Days blurred together, the same routine of interrogations and isolation, until she began to whisper to herself just to prove she still existed. The guards ignored her now, treating her like a ghost, and maybe that's what she had become, a secret too dangerous to acknowledge. But on the outside, Reeves hadn't given up. He had spent 4 sleepless nights plotting a way back into the prison, each idea more reckless than the last. He knew the security system, the shifts, the weak spots. He had built them, and that knowledge was both his curse and his weapon. He started by reaching out to an old contact, a former guard named Milton, who'd been fired years ago for smuggling contraband. Milton owed Reeves a favor, and though hesitant, he agreed to help. "You're out of your mind," Milton said, when Reeves laid out his plan. "If they catch you, you're done." Reeves just stared through the motel window, eyes fixed on the distant glow of the prison. "I'm already done," he muttered. The plan was desperate, but simple. Milton still had access to an old maintenance ID that could open service gates on the east wing, the same gates Reeves once used for deliveries. Using it, Reeves would sneak into the facility during the early morning shift change, find Mariah, and get her to talk, to tell him what the warden was planning. Maybe then he could expose the corruption inside. Maybe he could save them both. Inside the prison, Mariah began to notice strange changes. A guard she didn't recognize slipped her a folded note with her breakfast tray. Inside, written in shaky handwriting, were 4 words that made her heart stop: midnight, East Service Gate. Her pulse raced. She read it again, her hands trembling, unsure whether to believe it or fear it. Was it Reeves? A trap? Or both? By nightfall, she made her decision. She'd spent too long being a pawn in other people's games. If it was real, she would find out. And if it wasn't, she had nothing left to lose. As darkness fell, the storm clouds returned, thunder rolling low across the horizon. Reeves parked half a mile from the facility, his heart pounding as lightning illuminated the razor wire ahead. Every instinct screamed to turn back, but love and guilt had long drowned reason. Clutching the maintenance ID, he moved through the mud toward the east fence, every step echoing with ghosts of his past. At midnight, Mariah slipped from her cell during the shift change, moving through shadows like she had practiced escape her whole life. Her breath came in shallow gasps, her bare feet silent on the cold floor. When she reached the gate, she froze. The light flickered, and there he was, soaked, shaking, eyes wild with a mix of hope and fear. "Mariah," he whispered, voice breaking. She stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. "You came back." But before either could speak again, a blinding light exploded over them. "Freeze!" A voice shouted, the metallic click of a rifle echoing through the rain. They turned slowly, dread sinking deep. Behind the beam of the flashlight stood Officer Lang, smirking, gun aimed steady. "Well," he said, his voice dripping with satisfaction, "isn't this touching?" In that instant, both knew the plan had failed, and fate had finally caught up. The floodlight carved them out of the darkness like sinners caught in the act. The rain hammering down in relentless fury as Reeves and Mariah froze beneath its glare. Lang's smirk deepened, his finger grazing the trigger just enough to remind them who held control. "You two really thought you could outrun this place," he mocked, his voice cutting through the storm. Reeves raised his hands slowly, his mind racing for a plan that no longer existed. Mariah's heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst. Her bare feet sank into the mud as she whispered, "Daniel, what do we do?" Reeves didn't answer. He couldn't. Every instinct screamed to protect her, but there was nowhere to run. "Step away from the gate," Lang ordered, advancing with the confidence of a man who had been waiting for this moment. Lightning flared, and in that split second of white light, Reeves saw something glint on the ground, a discarded wrench from the maintenance shed. He glanced at Mariah just once, and she seemed to understand. As Lang stepped closer, Reeves lunged. The two men collided in the mud, their bodies twisting in a violent struggle, the gun skidding across the wet ground. Mariah screamed as Lang's elbow smashed into Reeves' jaw, but Reeves didn't stop. Years of pent-up rage against Lang, the prison himself, exploded as he fought with feral desperation. Lang clawed for the weapon, his laughter turning into a snarl. "You think you can save her?" he hissed. "You ruined her life." Reeves drove his knee into Lang's ribs, grabbed the wrench, and swung. The sound of metal meeting bone cut through the storm. Lang crumpled, the gun slipping into the mud beside him. For a heartbeat, everything went silent except the rain. Reeves stood over him, chest heaving, eyes burning with a mix of horror and relief. Mariah stared, trembling, whispering, "We have to go." Reeves nodded, grabbing her hand, pulling her toward the service gate. But as they reached it, the sirens began to wail, a sound that froze the blood in both their veins. Lang, barely conscious, had triggered the alarm before collapsing. The entire facility was waking up. "We can still make it," Reeves gasped, forcing the gate open. They slipped into the outer yard, sprinting through the storm toward the perimeter fence. lightning flashing above them like the wrath of God. Floodlights burst to life, one by one, slicing through the darkness. Gunfire cracked in the distance, guards shouting orders, boots pounding on gravel. Reeves and Mariah dove behind a storage truck, their breaths ragged, mud coating their skin. "We'll never make it," she cried. Reeves grabbed her shoulders, his eyes wild but unwavering. "Yes, we will," he said fiercely. "You're walking out of here. You're going to start over." "What about you?" she whispered, tears mixing with rain. He hesitated, knowing the answer. "I'll slow them down." Before she could protest, he pressed the gun, Lang's gun, into her shaking hands. "Follow the fence. There's a maintenance break near the south end. Crawl under it. Don't stop, no matter what you hear." He turned to face the approaching lights, heart pounding as he whispered, "Go." Mariah ran, her figure vanishing into the rain, while Reeves stepped into the open, firing a single warning shot into the sky. The guards swarmed in seconds, shouting, aiming, surrounding. Reeves dropped the gun and raised his hands. "She's gone," he said calmly, almost proudly. "You won't find her." The next sound was a deafening crack of a rifle, echoing across the yard. When the light flickered again, Daniel Reeves lay motionless in the mud, the rain washing the blood from his face as if trying to cleanse his sins. Dawn broke slowly over Gatesville, the rain finally easing into a pale mist that clung to the barbed fences like ghosts unwilling to leave. The prison yard was eerily silent, the mud still stained with the echoes of last night's chaos. Daniel Reeves lay where he had fallen, a sheet drawn over his lifeless body, his badge lying beside him, the symbol of everything he had once stood for, now meaningless. Inside the facility, whispers spread like wildfire. Some said he died trying to help an inmate escape. Others said he'd gone mad. But for those who knew the truth, it was something far more complicated. A man who had broken every rule, not out of corruption, but out of love. Mariah had made it as far as the outer woods before collapsing, her body trembling, lungs burning with exhaustion and grief. She pressed her ear to the ground as sirens echoed behind her, knowing that if she kept moving, Reeves' death wouldn't be in vain. Hours later, she found herself at a rundown gas station miles from the prison. A truck driver spotted her, drenched, barefoot, and shaking. "You okay, Miss?" he asked, but she couldn't speak. He handed her a blanket and a cup of coffee, not recognizing the face that was already plastered across news reports. That night, as she hid in the back of the truck heading west, she stared out at the endless Texas highway and whispered, "I'm sorry." Back at Gatesville, Warden Strick stood in her office, staring at the surveillance footage one last time. The grainy black and white image showed Reeves fighting Lang, the two men locked in a deadly struggle. She replayed the final moments over and over, her reflection visible in the monitor. Hard, cold, but haunted. Lang had survived, albeit with a fractured jaw and bruised pride. "He got what he deserved," Lang muttered, sitting across from her. "You should be thanking me." Strick didn't respond. She knew Lang had provoked it all, pushed Reeves past breaking point. The investigation would bury the details, paint Reeves as the villain and the system as blameless. That was how it always worked. But in her gut, she felt something gnawing, a quiet guilt, or maybe fear, that someday the truth would surface. Weeks passed. Reeves' death was ruled an officer's misconduct, resulting in fatal resistance. The department moved on. His name became a cautionary tale, whispered among guards, "Don't be another Reeves." But for Mariah, the story didn't end there. Months later, in a small town outside Amarillo, she took a job cleaning motels under a false name. Every night she would sit by the window, watching the highway lights, replaying his voice in her mind. Sometimes she dreamed of the rain of his eyes when he told her to run. She was free, but freedom felt heavier than prison walls. One evening, as she was cleaning room 6, she found a folded newspaper left behind by a guest. On the front page was a headline, "Officer's Death Linked to Prison Scandal. Warden Resigns Amid Allegations." Her hands trembled as she read the article. Details about falsified reports, abuse of inmates, and the truth about how Lang had manipulated both sides. Reeves' name was mentioned briefly, this time not as a criminal, but as a man who died exposing corruption. A tear rolled down her cheek. "You did it," she whispered. Outside, the wind rustled the dry Texas grass, carrying the scent of rain long gone. She stepped out of the motel and looked up at the vast, endless sky. For the first time, she didn't feel afraid. Reeves was gone, but his choice, his sacrifice, had freed more than just her. It had torn a hole in the darkness that surrounded them all. Somewhere in that gray horizon, she swore she could hear his voice, faint and steady. "Keep running."